here, right, you got price reduced, and also here, right, you got output here reduced. You're gonna have output reduced. So for example, during the Great Depressions, right, 1929 and 1933 that we looked at earlier on, right? And you can see during that time, and then price reduced, but deflations, and then output decline. Or during the global financial crisis, you got a short period of time when you also see price decline and output decline. Over the long run, over the long period of time, the short run aggregate supply is going to increase. And the economy here, right? So the short run aggregate supply here is going to move to the right over the long run. So over the long run here, the economy slowly make adjustment, and they're going to go to point C. So here you got over the long run, from point B here, the economy is going to move to point C. And at point C here, right, so output here, we're going to go back to the previous level, but then price still lower. But from point B to point C, it's going to be a very pain and long process. And John Keynes basically say, this is Keynes basically say, in the long run, we own debt. So in the long run, we own debt. We cannot wait for the economy to move from point B to point C anymore. It's too long, it's too painful. So now, right, in the long run, we own debt. So that's why here, right, at point B, we cannot wait to write the debt like that. Right, so now at point B, the government should intervene in. The government should intervene in. So very short in the slide. So you say if the government should intervene in, and the government should increase, right? So we're gonna need to have the government here. And the government here needs to increase aggregate demand so that the economy is gonna move from point B here, right, back to point A. So we need to here, right, the government increase aggregate demand, and then the economy here, right, gonna be back to point A. Output decline. And price increase is okay, right? Because we got deflations, and now we're gonna get price out of inflations. That's okay. That's okay. So that's in John Keynes. John Keynes said, okay, if the economy got recessions here, you got a negative short aggregate demand, and then if you move point B, the government should intervene in, and they should try to get the aggregate demand here back to this level. And when the government increase aggregate demand here, they're going to have two policies to increase aggregate demand. The first policy here is what we call the monetary policy. The monetary policy. The monetary policy deals with money supply and interest rate. Deal with money supply and interest rate. So basically, in the monetary policy here, right, the central bank is going to increase money supply, reduce interest rate. The central bank is going to increase money supply, reduce interest rate, and when interest rate reduces, right, it's going to encourage investment, and it's going to increase aggregate demand. So they're going to get, you're right, try to put more money in circulations. They're going to try to increase money supply, reduce interest rate, and then increase investment, increase aggregate demand. Try to get the economy here right back to point A. Back to point A. So that's in the monetary policy. This government also got another policy here, right, that we call the fiscal policy, that we're going to look at in the later half of these sections. So in the fiscal policy here, basically, also the government is going to increase government spending, reduce tax here, and also to increase aggregate demand. So the interventions of the government into the economy only happened after the Keynes theory. Right before Keynes, and then basically economics follow what we say the classical economic theories. And the classical economic theories basically say the government should not intervene in the economy. The government should only work in the sense that they're going to create good institutions So honest government, protecting property rights and things like that, right? But the government should not intervene in the economy. But China again say, okay, no. If you got a negative shock here to aggregate demand, and then the central bank here, right, or the government in general, should intervene in increase aggregate demand to get the economy back to point A. And they're going to be able to do it through these two policies here, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Okay, so is it unclear one? Okay, right? So now we're going to look at monetary policy. And first of all, right, we're going to look at the monetary policy. In this scenario, here, right, I'm going to put the scenario number one. We got a negative shock to aggregate demand. And that was explained right during the global financial crisis, during, say, the pandemic. The central bank around the world here, they basically print out a lot of money, reduce interest rates, basically try to boost the economy. So we've got a negative shock here to aggregate demand because of lockdown, for example. People reduce spending, they reduce consumption. So the central bank intervened in and tried to boost the aggregate demand back to normal. And also together with that, right, you got the government here got a lot of stimulus package. They increased government spending, try to stimulate the economy. Okay, so now we're gonna watch a small clip here talking about monetary policy in this case. First, we want to understand how they can help. And then secondly, we're going to look at the mechanism that the central bank really do right in credit. So firstly, right, we look at this case. Monetary policy, the best case scenario.
Monetary policy looks easy when it's just a matter of shifting some lines on a graph. But in practice, it's considerably more difficult. Choosing the right tools and when and how to use them is both an art and a science. To illustrate the difficulties, let's look at a relatively easy scenario. A negative shock to aggregate demand, driven by what John Maynard Keynes called animal spirits, emotions and instincts, confidence, and fear. Suppose that the economy has been growing at a rate of 3% per year, and the inflation rate is 7%. Now imagine that consumers, they become more pessimistic. They borrow and spend less. Banks lend less. Entrepreneurs cut back on expansions, and they invest less. All of this causes a negative shock to aggregate demand. The AD curve shifts to the left. Now notice that without an intervention, real GDP growth is going to decrease, and the economy will move to point B. Now in the long run, when fear recedes, we'll return to our steady-state growth level, but not without some sluggish growth and increased unemployment, or even a recession in the short run. Can the Fed, could it combat this sluggish growth with monetary policy? Yes, by increasing.
Okay, so this video was made at the time when Yellen was the chairman of Federal Reserve. That is Paul, and now give up that later because at that time he was the chairman of the Fed.
That is sluggish growth with monetary policy? Yes. By increasing the growth rate of the money supply, the Fed could offset the negative aggregate demand shock. Looks great. Disaster avoided. If only it were so easy. At least three issues make it difficult for the Fed to choose the right course of action at the right time. First, the quality of the data. It takes time to gather and analyze good data on the economy. Sometimes in the past, revisions to the data have occurred years after the actual events. But the Fed, it can't wait for the revisions. It has to act now. Second,
Okay, so the first problem here is the data quality. Basically, it's translated to how can we know that we're at point B? If we think we're at point B, right, and if we think we're at point B, and now, right, to get the economy to point A, we're going to need to increase aggregate demand that much, right? But how do we know that we're at point B? If we think we're at point B, but basically we're here, so we boost that much not enough yet to get the economy back to the normal level. But instead of point B, right, we think we're at point B with the economy somewhere out here, right? And then we boost that much, we overboost the economy, and the economy here, right, becomes overheat, and you got inflation. So the first problem here, right, we know that, okay, in that case, we need to increase the credit demand here, right? But then how much here? How much here, it depends on where we are standing now. How do we know where we're standing now? We need time to collect the data related to the economy. And then we see that, like, this is GDP, right? And for GDP, we got revisions. So we got probably the number, and then a few days, few months, a year later, they say, okay, this is revised. So how do we know that we're at point B? That's the first thing. The second thing is timing.
Timing. The Fed's actions take time to affect the economy, usually some 6 to 18 months after the fact. So even if the Fed correctly identifies the problem and acts right away, the situation may have changed by the time that its policies begin to take effect.
Okay, so the second thing is timing. Every policy got lags. So here, right, the central bank increase money supply, reduce interest rate, but investment will not occur tomorrow, right? So firms see that interest rate reduce, now they're gonna need, okay, I wanna increase investment, I wanna make a plan, and then I wanna borrow money, and then make an investment, and so on, right? So it's gonna take time. It's gonna take time. So the problem here is, now we able to decide that now we're at point B, we act in the right direction, so we increase aggregate demand that much. But when the policy really takes effect, the economy may go this way or that way. Right? It's not no longer at B anymore. So today we're at B, we take actions, we correctly define the problem. Like 6 months, 18 months later, the policy is not in effect, and we need to know where we are. So somebody will say that the job of the central bankers is like you drive a car and then with no straight line whatsoever, so you maybe drive in the dark. Okay, so timing, right? You need to expect what's going to happen and then act in advance. Because now, right, you act now, and for some time in the future, in fact, it might be too late. So you need to act in advance. And that's also, the reason why some people now, they say, okay, in order to cut inflation, it's good that the central bank needs to increase interest rate. But then, when they see the data, inflation is still high, they keep increasing the interest rate. The people complain, say that every policy got time lags. So when the policy really take effect, and then maybe the problem, the recession is maybe already there. So you got the right timing. And the third problem here is control.
Third, control. The Fed's control of the money supply, it's incomplete and imperfect. Many of its tools rely on other actors, such as banks. As we saw during the Great Recession, the banks, they stopped lending like they normally do. So some of the Fed's tools became less effective.
Okay, right. So now the control. The Fed here, they want to increase its money supply. They can control the monetary base, but they cannot control real end. All here, right, required reserve is normally there, fixed, because it's too strong. And then the central bank normally do not train the required reserve a lot. But then this C and E here, they belong to the public or the banks. So if you still remember, right, during the global financial crisis 2007, 2009, even when the central bank they pump a lot of money, so monetary base increase a lot, right? But the money multiplier basically go below 1. Because here, right, banks basically refuse to lend money out. They fear of losing money. They rather sitting on a bunch of money, right, rather than lending money out. So even the fact that the central bank print a lot of money out, the money supply just increased a little. So that's the thing that the central bank is not able to control. Right? On the contrary, right, during the during the pandemic, for example, the central bank, they print money, pay a lot of money, but given this time, banks, they lend money out, banks are strong, they lend money out, right? People, right, they keep less cash, and then you got here, money supply increased significantly during this time. So control.
So what happens when the Fed doesn't get its policy just right? If the Fed undershoots or doesn't stimulate the economy enough to offset the aggregate demand shock, then growth will still be sluggish in the short run as the economy slowly adjusts back to the natural growth rate. More problematic is when the Fed overshoots. When the Fed increases the money supply beyond what's needed, then the economy, it can overeat. Sure, we may get some more real growth in the short run, but we're also going to get more inflation. Price signals become distorted. And it's difficult for the Fed to course correct. In fact, if the inflation rate gets too high, the Fed will want to reduce the inflation rate at disinflation. But that too will likely cause unemployment. Many economists think that the Federal Reserve did overstimulate the economy in the 1970s. By the end of the 1970s, inflation was running away at over 13% a year. And Ronald Reagan was elected to the presidency in 1980, in part to change economic policy. By 1983, the Federal Reserve, under cigar-chomping chairman Paul Volcker, it had brought inflation down to 3%, but at the price of a very severe recession.
Okay, so you can see the problem here, right? If you got the problem of like data quality, there's timing and also the control. So if the central bank, right, the problem here they may undershoot or overshoot the economy. And then if they overshoot here, right, so for example, during this time, you know that the first year of inflation here, that created by the oil prices. So the economy got the oil prices, you got inflation, the economy is in recessions. That's a cut to inflation, right? But then after that, right, inflation, reduced the economy in recessions. And the central bank overstimulated the economy. They printed too much money, and that goes into the second oil prices, so it's going up here. Inflation in the US, right, was 13%. And then after that, right, under the President Donald Reagan, they undertake the process of disinflations. So we got here, right, disinflations. We got deflations. Right, so deflations here, that means we got price reduced. Negative inflations. That's it, deflation. For disinflations, that means we got high inflations and we try to reduce the rate of inflations. Okay, so disinflation, right, that means reduce inflations, but deflation, that means negative inflations. Negative inflation. So here, they try in the process of disinflation, and finally inflation back to 3%. But during this time, the US got severe recessions. And economics here, right, they calculated something they call the sacrifice ratios. And the sacrifice ratios here is basically they got the sacrifice ratio and they calculated and they see that if we want to reduce inflation by 1% and output decline by 5%. Okay, so that's the sacrifice that the US economy have to make during that time. So you can see that in theory, it's just the matter of simply supply, right? But it's not that easy. It's not that easy because if we overstimulate, and then the economy can be get recessions. And that's something that we see today, right? Well, this is central banks around the world overstimulate the economy during the pandemic. Yeah. And then after the pandemic, we got high inflation. So are we on the process of disinflation? This process here, and it's going to be painful, right? So that's and if you look at the beginning of this video, this is what they say the best scenario. So this is a simple case. This is a simple case. Okay, now what's even more complicated? Gonna be the second case when we got a negative shock to aggregate supply. So here, right, I'm gonna have this number 2, a negative shock to aggregate supply. So here, Y and P. Again, I'm going to draw everything at equilibrium. Okay, so now we got a negative shock to aggregate supply. The negative shock to aggregate supply, say the oil prices in 1970s. Today, right, we also got a negative shock to aggregate supplies when we got a disruption in the supply chain management. Disruption in supply chain management increased the input price, given the shortage of goods and services. And also you got the right increase in oil price and gas and so on and on, right? So we got a negative shock here to aggregate supply. And then with this case, the short run aggregate supply here, see left. Now this is point A, this is point B, right? At point B, we got here higher price and then lower output. So if here, right, it's going to be from point A to point B, you got here, right, low output and lower price. So now you boost the economy and then price increase, output increase, that's okay, right? That's good. But here for this point here, you got price increase. In that case, you got inflations. And then output decline here, you got recessions or stagnations. And this is the situation that we call stagflation, right? Stagflations. And now in this case, the central bank, they have to take a more difficult choice. A more difficult choice. Okay, so now we're going to split in this case then.
So far, we've reviewed the challenges that the Fed faces when dealing with a straightforward aggregate demand shock. Now, we're going to graduate to a more difficult scenario, more difficult for the Fed, a negative real shock to the economy. Recall from earlier videos that a real shock, such as a rapid rise in the price of oil, that will shift the long-run aggregate supply curve to the left, causing growth to decrease and inflation to increase. Unfortunately, combating these two issues, sluggish growth and high inflation, that requires opposite actions. To decrease inflation, the Fed would have to decrease the money supply and reduce aggregate demand. That will reduce the growth rate even further. Alternatively, the Fed can try to increase real growth by increasing the money supply and increasing aggregate demand. But that comes at the cost of even higher inflation. And remember, economic data isn't always easy to understand in real time. It sometimes happens, for example, that the higher inflation rate is seen in the data before the growth rate starts to decline. So the Fed, it might start to cut back on the money supply before realizing that the economy is heading towards a recession. So the Fed may start to move the economy in the wrong direction before learning what the actual state of the economy is.
Okay, right, so for this scenario, you have to choose one. For this scenario, when you increase aggregate demand, you can deal with two problems. Output back to the normal level, and you do not have inflation anymore. That's good, right? So by increasing aggregate demand, problem solved, even though you have a problem there, right? But then, for this one, the Federal Reserve here, they can only choose once. If you want to curb inflation, so economy here, right? If you want to curb inflation, you have to reduce the price. That means you're gonna need to do what? You're gonna need to reduce aggregate demand to curb inflation. And when we reduce aggregate demand, right, we're gonna need to reduce money supply, increase interest rate. Like what the central bank around the world they did today. So they basically increase interest rate, they make it more expensive for firms to borrow. They make it more expensive for people to borrow, so they're gonna cut out their spending, they're gonna cut their investment. Aggregate demand reduce. Aggregate demand reduce. Price here, right, may decline. However, economy here gonna be further into recessions. On the other way, if you want to follow growth, if you want to deal with stagnations here, what they're gonna do, they're gonna need to increase aggregate demand. They do the opposite here, right? So this is the one they're gonna do here, right, to curb inflation. So this one here, right, to reduce inflation. On the contrary, if you want to have higher output growth, we're gonna look at that. Okay, in this case here, right, you got output back to normal, but then you got higher inflation. High inflation. And this is what the central bank here, right, they chose in 1970s. In 1970s, okay, you got the oil crisis. The oil crisis here, right? And economies in recessions. Many central banks at that time, they chose this part here. Increase aggregate demand to boost the economy back to normal level. But that inflation was just higher and higher, and it reached like 30-40%. In some other countries, around 20-25% here. And then after that, right, the central bank, they need to, anyway, we cannot keep inflation at that high level. So they started in a period of disinflation, and it's gonna become worse here. Today, this is what the central bank did here, right? Okay, they want to cut inflation because now the central bank they follow the model of central bank independence, and other central bank they put price stability as their primary goal. So because they cannot go this way, right? They okay, I want to cut inflation there. And to cut inflation, they reduce money supply, increase interest rate to cut inflation, but you know what's avoided us in the coming one, right? And the things here, right? Every monetary policy got time lags. So the US they increase interest rate at that much level, the impact here going to be felt 6-18 months after. So the impact not yet felt, it's going to be felt with some time lag here. So it's going to be a more difficult problem, right? A more difficult problem. And sometimes you will see here, right, the quality of data. So the quality of data, right? So we may go, for example, we do not know, if we cannot know exactly where we're standing, and then we can make the wrong choice. The wrong choice. This is a problem.
And this isn't the end of the dilemma. It's common for negative real shocks and negative aggregate demand shocks to come together. In the real world, everything is intertwined. And bad news, like an oil shock, could cause people to become pessimistic and to cut back on their spending, causing aggregate demand to fall. Now, if you're confused right now, don't worry. You're not alone. Fed economists get confused as well. It's just not obvious how to correctly identify the combination of shocks that's hitting an economy. And so there's always lots of heated debate among Fed economists and policymakers about what the right course of action is. Although the Fed has considerable power to influence aggregate demand, the complexity of the economy, and the challenges of data quality, timing, and control, that leaves lots of room for error.
Okay, the problem here is normally we have these two together. Right, so we got, okay, a negative shock to aggregate supply. And that's what we also have today, right? So now after we have this, all of these things, and then negative shock to aggregate supply, and then people become more pessimistic. So you can see that this day, right, people started to cut spending. People started to cut spending compared to spending this year, right? In this time, right, compared to in the past. So people cut spending. So you've got these things happening at the same time, and they make the problem. How to get the right direction of the economy is going to be very complicated. So people write, okay, we know that we should go this way, but then how much? That's the problem. That's the problem. So you can see now, right? You can understand the difficulties of these central bankers when they try to direct the economy. Okay, so that's the overview of the monetary policy. I hope that is clear, right? Any question anyone related to these sections? The materials that we just covered? Okay? No? Okay, so if no, right, we're going to continue. So now the next one here is, okay, we know that in order to, for example, right, cut with a negative shock to aggregate demand, the government here is to conduct a monetary policy that increase money supply, reduce interest rate. But how they do that? How they do that, right? And we're going to look at the monetary policy tools. The monetary policy tools. Okay, so if you look at this here, if we look at this thing, right, before what I was showing you, right, there are different ways to increase monetary base. Different ways to increase monetary base, right? The central bank can increase monetary base here, right, by working on the open market operations. In the open market operation, they buy and sell bonds. For example, if they sell bonds, if they buy bonds, for example, right, they pay money that will increase buying reserves, they increase monetary base. Monetary base. So the open market operations here, right, is a tool at which the central bank can increase monetary base. The central bank can also increase monetary base here, right, by using, the discount window. So they lend money to firms. They lend money to banks. And finally, they can trade it using the required reserves. So now, right, we're going to look at these monetary policy tools here in more details. So I'm gonna okay. So if you read newspapers and you can see the news, example in the U.S., the U.S. Central Bank increased the Fed fund rate. Okay, so they got a meeting and they increased the Fed fund rate for half a point. Right, they increased the Fed fund rate for 0.25% to 25 basis points, for example. So what is the Fed fund rate? What is the Fed fund rate? And then how can they use that here to intervene in the market? So first of all, right, let's look at the Fed fund rate. We're going to look at the U.S. monetary policy because in other countries it's going to be quite similar. Okay, so the Fed fund rate here, right? The Fed fund rate, basically, that's in the interbank market, the interbank rate of the USA. Okay, so the Fed fund rate here, right, that's basically the overnight interbank rate. That is the overnight interbank lending rate. Overnight, that means they lend money to each other for only 1 day. So that's it, the overnight. Very short-term loans. Very short-term loans. So now, right, how this happened? Assume that we got bank A and bank B. We got several banks in the system here, right? And bank A and bank B, for example, assume that the central bank required every bank to get a required reserve, say, of to say 5%. 5%. It's just for simple, right? So bank A, 5% here is going to be calculated on deposit. And the amount deposit for banks really change every day. So the amount of required reserve required by the central bank will change every day. Assume that bank A, right, currently they got 1,000 deposit, and bank B here also got 1,000 deposit. So this is deposit, right? And then, if that happened, okay, so I just say 10% for simple calculations. So the bank A here, right, they're going to need to keep required reserve $100, 10%, and bank B, they also need to keep $100, 10% of the deposit. Well, the price is not that high, right? But I just take for simplicity 10%. To borrow the next day, bank A, for example, they manage to attract more deposit. So they attract here 1,200 deposit. While bank B here, right? Some people go to the bank and draw money, so only 800 here. So now in that case, right, bank A should give 120, while bank B here, right, should give only 80 as required reserve. So now in the interbank market here, right, the bank in surplus of money can lend money to the bank in shortage of money, but they only lend overnight because the next day the deposit going to change and then the required reserve going to change. Okay, so that's in the interbank market. And the interbank market here, right, they call that the Fed funds because they are based on the funds placed in the central bank. So they call that the Fed fund rate. Basically, the rate to lend each other on the funds placed with the Fed. Well, and that's the overnight rate. Okay, so we got this market here. This market here, right? So bank in surplus of money can lend to the bank in shortage of money. In this interbank market. So now here, right, we're gonna have two times, right? We got this one because the target Fed fund rate and the market Fed fund rate. So you got the target and the market one. The target Fed fund rate here, right, is the rate that targeted by the central bank. So the central bank say, okay, they increase the Fed fund rate, that means they increase the target rate, the rate that they want to get. However, they still leave banks in the market, right, to borrow and lend to each other. Going around that rate. So the rate that banks actually lend and borrow each other here, right? These are the market rate, the actual rate. So look at this. This is the target rate, which is the black one of the US in the past, right? And then you can see, right, the effective rate, that is the actual rate. So sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. The thing here is, when Fed set the target rate, it will not control that target rate by like an order saying that if you borrow and if you lend in the market, you have to borrow and lend at that rate. No. But they're gonna stand ready in the market. So if there are higher demand that may increase interest rate, they're gonna stand ready to supply more money into to offset that increase in demand. So that rate's gonna be lower. And if they lower, demand, right, and then get interest rate low, and then they're gonna get to withdraw money out. So monetary policy is something that the central bank do every day. They keep the rate, right, when money demand change, so they have to intervene in the market every day to keep that rate. Because in the market, it's not like a controlled economy where they say, okay, everybody borrow at 5%, no. And no, right? So they target the rate and they want to keep that rate by borrowing, selling, and then buying bonds in the market. It's just almost the same, right? For example, China keep the fixed rate with US dollar. So they kind of say, okay, the dollar rate is $7. They have some demand of dollars and Chinese renminbi. And they have to intervene in the market by doing the opposite, selling money. We're going to talk more about that later on. You're right? But remember that here in the US is not a controlled economy. So you will not have the target rate that being controlled by orders and you should borrow that. You must lend to each other that rate. But there's going to be a market. And then the Fed going to intervene to get the rate down around that target rate. So now we're going to look at that market. And the market for the Fed fund rate here, right? We call that the market for reserves. I mean, in the slide it's very details, but it's basically for you to get home if you want to understand more. Okay, so this is the market for buying reserves. This is the market for buying reserves. So basically, this is the market for the Fed fund rate. Okay, so this is the market for the Fed fund rate. So you've got the Fed fund rate here. Right. And this is the amount, the quantity of reserve. Quantity of reserve of moving ball is actually quantity of non reserve. So now, right, in the Fed fund rate, the Federal Reserve here, right, they basically intervene in this market by doing open market operations. So they're going to control here, right, and they're going to put using the open market operations. If you still remember, the open market operations here is the actions of the central bank buying and selling treasury bonds. Okay, so in the open market operation here, right, they're going to buy and sell treasury bonds. Buy and sell treasury bonds. Why they buy and sell treasury bonds? Because treasury bonds, they're safe. If they buy them and they keep them, right, if they come and sell them, they still know that they will be able to get money back from the governments. It's safe. It's safe. Okay, so the reason why they choose it, this one rather than other one, which is safe. It's safe. So we got here, right? The quantity of reserve here of banks. This is what we say the non-borrow reserve. So the reserve here, right, every year can go from two ways, right? The first one here is from our roll. So from buying and selling security, and the other one here from loans, right? So if any increase from loans, we call it borrow reserve. So the reserve increase from borrowing money, right? And this is what I say non-borrow reserve. So basically from our loan. So this one here gonna be determined by the central bank. So it's gonna be kind of like a vertical one because it's set by the central bank. The central bank gonna be determine this quantity. The central bank gonna be able to determine this quantity. Okay. Okay. And now I'm gonna look back. I'm gonna get back to the 7 here, right? A, B, and B, and then we got here, right, bank A here, right, they got today, right, deposit, 800, right, so the bank A here, right, they got only 100 and 100 here, but the demand here, 120 and they can go to bank B and then borrow money. So bank B here, right, can lend money to bank A. Okay, so this is the previous problem I mentioned, right? So now, bank A here, when they're in need of money, they have two options. The first option here is that they're going to go to bank B to borrow money and pay the Fed fund rate. The second option, they're going to go to the central bank and borrow money here, right? And the rate that they pay here, right, we call that say the discount rate. So when the central bank lend money here, right, we call that say the discount loans. Discount loans. In English, discount loans là vay chiết khấu. Ở Việt Nam mình thì được gọi là cho vay tái chiết khấu. Có tên chữ tái. Right. So what is the mean by tái? They call it cho vay tái chiết khấu just to compare, right? If we borrow money from, so what is the discount loans here? A discount loans here is a loan that central bank meant to commercial banks. But to be able to borrow these loans here, the central bank gonna need to get collateral in the form of treasury bonds. So the commercial bank, right, they're gonna get some treasury bonds and they bring those treasury bonds here, right, to the central bank. And the central bank here, right, if you look again, you got $1 million value of the treasury bonds, and now I'm gonna lend you money, but I'm gonna lend you less than that value. So I'm going to lend you maybe 990,000 only, not $1 million. So we call that as a discount. So discount that means less than the face value. Okay? Less than the face value. So if you got a value of the collateral, right, and then you lend for the value less than the value of the collateral, we call that the discount loans. In the US, they just call it the discount loans. But in Vietnam, right, if people, right, we borrow money from the banks, we use collateral, but they lend it for the value of less than collateral. The bank said they give a discount loan first. And now if the banks go to the central bank and borrow money like that, and then we say in Vietnam, right, ngân hàng nhà nước cho vay tái chiết khấu. Nên là cho vay chiết khấu là ngân hàng thương mại cho doanh nghiệp vay, còn cho vay tái chiết khấu là thì đó là nghiệp vụ của ngân hàng trung ương. In English, there's only one word. Discount loans. In Vietnam, right, we also got cho vay tái cấp vốn, cho vay tái chiết khấu và cho vay tái cấp vốn. So what is tái chiết khấu or discount loans? For the discount loans, the collateral gonna be treasury bonds abuse. Treasury bonds abuse is safe. For the cho vay tái cấp vốn, in Vietnamese we call, when we translate to English, we call that refinancing loans. Refinancing. Basically, I mean, there's no equivalent words like in English, but when we try to translate it to English, we call that refinancing. So what does that mean by refinancing? Refinancing loans here, right, is the case of, because the market for bonds in Vietnam in the past is not yet developed, so there's not much treasury bonds to use as collateral. So the banks here, right, commercial bank, when they go to the central bank to borrow money, instead of using treasury bonds as collateral, they use the loans as collateral. And these are normally loans to big companies, for example. So my bank here, I'm Vietcombank, I make a loans to this state-owned company, like the oil company, for example, PV, right? And then this is very safe. I don't know what's safe or not, right? But this is safe. So I'm going to use this here, right, as a collateral loans to go to the central bank to borrow money. So that's the cho vay tái cấp vốn. The collateral is not treasury bonds, but it's in loans back to like the state-owned company. And the rate here, right? So that's a little riskier for the central bank, right? So the rate of refinancing loans is normally higher than the rate of pre-discount loans. But in other countries, they should got discount loans. In Vietnam, we got that refinancing loans as well. Okay, so bank A here, right? They got two options. The first option is here. They borrow money from bank B. And if they borrow money from bank B here, right, they pay the Fed fund rate. The second option is here, right? So bilateral, a lag, and then pay the Fed fund, right? Pay the Fed fund rate. Okay? The second option is here, right? Bank A here can go to the central bank. And if they borrow money from the central bank here, right, they're gonna pay the discount rate. They're gonna pay the discount rate. Okay? So in that case, can the Fed fund rate be higher than the discount rate? No, right? It cannot be higher because if the Fed fund rate is higher, so why not borrow from Bank B? Go to the central bank and borrow money. Okay? So in that case here, right, if you look at this E to say ID stand for the discount rate. Stand for the discount rate. So the Fed fund rate cannot be higher, so the supply curve goes up and then it goes that way. Because the Fed fund, the discount rate here serves at the ceiling of the Fed fund rate. It serves at the upper limit. The Fed fund rate cannot go above that rate. Okay? Right. So that's the supply. Now demand. Demand is downward sloping, right? When the rate here is high, demand is low, right? So if I borrow money, the interest rate is high, I'm gonna let this be willing to borrow money, right? And then vice versa. Is that right? So demand here is downward sloping. Downward sloping. And then now, in the world, in the US, for example, in 2008, the US introduced one rate, they call this the offer rate, or the deposit rate. The deposit rate. So the deposit rate here, right, is the rate that the central bank paid for the commercial bank on their excess reserve in the central bank. Okay, so before if the commercial bank had money with the central bank and they got excess reserve, they received that way. But now with the introductions of the deposit rate, so if my bank got some excess reserve and I put with the central bank, right, it's still there, I will be able to earn that deposit rate. So now if you look at Bank B now, right, there is surplus of money. They're gonna have two options. The first option here is I'm gonna lend money to Bank A and I'm gonna earn the Fed fund rate. That's the first option, right? The second option is I put money there, I should leave money there, and I'm gonna be able to earn the deposit rate. So I should leave money there, right? I leave 100 with the central bank, with the Fed, and I'm gonna earn interest rate on that $20 here. Okay, so you got the two options here. Another question is here is, will the Fed fund rate be lower than the deposit rate? No, right? If the Fed fund rate is lower, why did the borrower lend it to Bank A to leave it with the central bank on the deposit rate? So I only lend money to Bank A if the Fed fund rate here is higher than the deposit rate. So if I got this one in the deposit rate, so you got that. The deposit rate serves as a floor. So the Fed fund rate will not be higher than the discount rate and will not be lower than the deposit rate. And here, right, at equilibrium here, and what I have here, this is the Fed fund rate. So this is the framework here, right, that we're going to look at. The market for buying reserves. Okay, everybody? Okay, so this point. Clear? Where you at? So now, right, let's say, assume assume that the central line target the Fed fund rate at this point. So this is the rate that they target. This is the rate they target, right? They target at this rate. Now, money demand change on the time. For example, this is like the holiday season. And at the holiday season, people are going to need more money for their transactions. And then, like the tech holiday, for example, so people may get more money for their transactions. Money demand increase. The money demand here, right, gonna shift to the right. When money demand shifts to the right here, there's gonna be a process on interest rate to increase. A process for interest rate to increase. Right? So if you got zero, money demand increase, and then a process for interest rate to increase. Now, if the central bank want to keep the Fed rate at that level, they're gonna keep here, right? And what they're going to do here is that they're going to need to increase the reserve. They're going to need to increase reserve here. So now what they're going to do in the open market operations, they're going to need to sell treasury bonds. So here, right, it is here, right, they're going to need to sell treasury bonds here. You need to sell treasury bonds in the market. And then here, right, increase the supply of money, increase money supply here, right, increase the supply here. So you got the Fed fund rate stay at the target. Okay, so money demand trend all the time. And the central banks, basically the OMO market, right, OMO office committee, they need to look at that and then they sell and buy treasury bonds that offset the increase or decrease in money demand. That's the things they do every day. So in the US, for example, they've done it in the New York Federal Bank. Okay, so we got that one. Okay, this system is also very good in the sense that when they got the upper and lower limit here, and if, for example, here, right, there's a sudden increase in money demand, and the Fed, for example, didn't know about that, and they were slow to react, for example. So I said again, right? Assume that there's an unexpected increase in money demand, and the Fed may be slow to react to unexpected. Money demand jumps up here. But then the Fed fund rate cannot go above the discount rate. Okay, so you look at that, right? Yeah. You cannot go above that discount rate. You got here, right? So without any innovations, and then you know that it will not be able to go above. Or vice versa. It will not be able to go down. So today, I mean in the past, here, before the introduction of this system, the Fed, they target the rate is one rate. But then starting from 2009 here, and then they target, right, they got a new corridor here, right? So if you look at this corridor here, okay. Okay, so here, right? So they got that corridor here. Right, so now the Fed here, when they announce the target rate, they announce it in a range. So the upper here, that's in the discount rate. And the lower here, that's in the deposit rate. The deposit rate. So if you look at the announcement of Fed today, right? So you'll see the increase into this range here, to this range. And let's see, in the new corridor, that system introduced in 2009, and this is what happened today, right? So this is the Fed fund rate. They kept the rate at very low level, basically 0%, during a long period of time. And when the economy is somehow like normal, right? They started increasing interest rate. But I mean, if you look at this is 2016, right? And this is 2019, so that's a kind of period of time. But when after they increased this, right, they realized that they increased too much. And then they started, I mean, this is before the pandemic. They realized that, okay, they increased too much, and the economy, right, somehow got into recessions here, right? So they started to reduce interest rate a bit. This is around 1980. So if you look at the stock market, the economy at that time, right? And in 2018, we talk a lot about the somehow new recessions coming during this time. And the same, right? If anybody invests in stock market in Vietnam, right? So 17 is a good year, and then 18 is not a good year anymore, right? And then you got that, and then pandemic happened. We got poof here now, right? Back to 0%. And then now, right? Poof increased that much in very short period of time. Okay. So some people may also ask, I feel that whether that is really justified. Increase that much level in such period of time. You see all the problem related to timing and so on. But anyway, this is the system. This is the system. Okay, so we got the system here. And now if the central bank here, right, they want to increase or reduce interest rate, they want to do work with this member reserve, right? Selling and buying bonds. Buying bonds. Okay? And that's what we did. But then we got, so that's in the first one. We got the system here. System. Okay, so we got this one. And what difference to man here as we have to know. I mean, this is just on a explain, right? Okay, so basically, when we look at the monetary policy tools here, right? We got this one we call the OMO, the open market operations. The OMO here, right? For this tool, the first is in complete control of the tool here. They can, it's flexible and precise. It's very small or large. So if you increase a little, right? You sell a little bond. If you want to increase a lot, you sell many bonds. So very precise, very flexible. It can be small or large. It can reverse easily. So if you sell the bonds, when you realize that it's too much, you buy some back. So it can be easily reversed and very fast. Very fast. If you compare this OMO here with loans, loans here, the Fed can only set the rate. Whether to borrow money from the Fed or not, right? It's up to the commercial banks. So they can only set the rate, but they cannot determine, right, how much does the commercial bank going to borrow money from them. That's the first thing. The second thing, they cannot be precise, sure about the amount that the commercial bank can borrow, and it cannot be reversed. Once the commercial bank lend money, right, and if you realize that, borrow money, and then the central bank realize that they lend too much money, they cannot say, okay, come on, give me back my money, it's too much. No, they cannot do that, right? So these loans here, basically not deals for monetary policy, but they are deals here, right, as the lender of last resort and crisis management. So normally, commercial banks, they only go to the central bank to borrow money in the case that they really need money and they got nobody to turn to. The discount loans here, in theory, can help to increase monetary base and not net yields. And also here, right, so this is what we know already. And also you got reserve requirement. The doctor to not be affected because if the central bank want to, say, trade the required reserve, and they're going to affect the whole system, it's very powerful. And basically, the required reserve here are there to make sure that banks keep money away to make sure that they will have enough money to pay back the deposit. And in some countries, They even abolished the required reserve, like in New Zealand, for example. They say that these days, with all the modern way to manage banks, banks should know how much money they're going to keep to make sure that they're going to be able to collect deposit. Standard banks do not innovate it, and they even abolished that requirement. So, overall. So now when we talk about open market, monetary policy tools, this basically overall. And that's what we say conventional policy tools. The policy tools that has been used after came starting from 1950, 1960s, up to before the financial crisis. Up to before the financial crisis. But then in the financial crisis, we got this problem. This is the crisis. Now we got the financial crisis. The central bank, US for example, they quickly cut interest rate at a very low level, basically 0%. And so 0%, right? And that still failed to stimulate the economy. Now what should they do? You say, right, we reduce interest rate to stimulate investment, okay? So reduce interest rate, and interest rate now already reduced to 0, but it's not yet to stimulate the economy. So basically, these conventional tools here, they didn't work. So all of those here, right? And now, right in that case, in 2008, the central bank, they developed some new tools, and they called it the unconventional policy tools. So these new tools here was just applied from 2008 to 2009, and they just been applied for the last 15 years. So it was pretty new. It was pretty new. They was applied here, right, where lowering the target interest rate to 0 is not sufficient to stimulate the economy. That's what happened in 2008, 2009. And when an impaired financial system prevents conventional interest rate policy from supporting the economy, impaired with the financial system in trouble. The central bank tried to increase monetary base. Okay, they tried to increase monetary base. Hopefully that money supply will increase. But then this system, the financial system here, right, they refuse to lend money out. What should they do? Okay, money, the central bank want the money finally get to firms. Firms making investment, aggregate demand increase. So they get money to banks, but banks refuse to lend. They rather sit on a big part of money rather than letting money out. So it didn't work, right? It didn't work. And then on the other hand, right, they reduced interest rate to 0, but not enough to stimulate the economy. So now they have to turn into this kind like unconventional policy tools. So what are the unconventional policy tools? There are 3 categories of unconventional tools. The first one, this is a commitment. They promise to keep interest rate low in the future. So first, they make a promise that, okay, we're going to keep interest rate low. But this is more important. Quantitative easing. So have you heard of those quantitative easing package? So what is quantitative easing? Okay, so you may read this paper, you may hear that the central bank, right, they conduct a lot of QE package, quantitative easing package. So what is quantitative easing package? Okay, so we got this in the market for buying reserves. Okay, right. So now assume that the economy here, right? Okay, so it's normally originally there. Okay, so we got the Fed fund rate is here. FIA. Economy is FIA. Now let's assume that economy got recessions like global financial crisis. The US Central Bank and many central banks around the world, they increase non-borrowing reserve. They increase non-borrowing reserve, you're right. Okay, so sorry. Is this one? I'm sorry, I divide it to get money into. Okay, so you're right. Assume the economy got into recessions. And then the central bank, they increase a lot of money, they pump a lot of money in the economy. So they increase reserve, right? They increase reserve a lot. They increase monetary base a lot, right? Interest rate in the market here reduced to 0. But it's not enough to stimulate the economy. So now, economy moves to point B. And then in that case, right, the conventional policy to stop. And then right now, if the central bank still continue to increase monetary base more than the amount needed to get interest rate to 0, that's the quantitative easing. So they increase money that much, right, to point C, and that point here, right, B to C, we call that C quantitative easing. And then, right, so this will continue easing 1, and then go there. That's it, continue easing 2, and so on. So continue easing here, right? That's the amount of money that comes into the economy more than the amount needed to get interest rate to 0. So if we do it from A to B, that's in the conventional one. But when they connect at point B, right, it go to C and so on here, right? That's it. That's economic easing. And also, during this time, together with quantitative easing here, right? The central bank become what is said credit easing. So we got quantitative easing here, right? Quantitative easing here, right? When the central bank supply RE reserve beyond the quantity needed to lower the policy rate to 0. So BCD, that's a quantitative easing. Right, so they try to get more and more money, even though, right, it's more than needed to get interest rate 0. So interest rate 0, and they still pump money into exactly what they say quantitative easing. And together with that, right, they also conduct credit easing. So this is quantitative easing, and then together that, right, credit easing. So what does it mean by credit easing? Credit easing. So here, right, normally in the past, when the central bank conduct the OMO market, they only buy and sell treasury bonds securities. Why they only buy treasury bonds? Because treasury bond is very safe. And they also only keep treasury bonds as collateral. Because okay, if they do not gonna pay me back, right? And then I could still able to get money back from the government. So they only keep treasury bonds and use as collateral, or they still just buy treasury bonds and use it. Okay, so this is the holding, right? U.S. Federal Reserve assets. So this is before the crisis. This is 2007. And then you can see, right, these areas here, that's the traditional security holding. Traditional security, traditional security holding, that's it basically treasury bonds and bills. So the majority of their assets here, right, these are treasury bonds and bills. And this is one here, right, green one, lending to financial institutions. Lending to financial institutions. And then crisis happened here, at that point. And you can see, apart from that, right, you got federal agency debt and mortgage-backed securities purchase. So now, right, instead of like buying only treasury bonds, they lower their standard. They accept to buy those mortgage-backed securities from commercial banks. So before, right, when they do this one, they try to put money in circulation, for example, they buy treasury bond from commercial banks. But now, not only treasury bonds, they are free to buy mortgage-backed security and all those things. You can see the problem with commercial banks. Commercial banks, right, they also hold securities, and commercial banks, they, by regulations, they are only allowed to buy investment-grade security. So they buy treasury bonds, they buy corporate bonds, they buy mortgage-backed security. Because a lot of mortgage-backed security, they got very high rating, AAAs. So, I mean, not only individual people, like pension funds, commercial banks, they all buy mortgage-backed security. But then, crisis happened, they cannot sell this mortgage-backed security in the market. In the market, they got lost with those mortgage-backed security. And if you remember, right, before I mentioned about the balance sheet of the commercial bank, right? So mortgage-backed security is then categorized as trading security. And when the value of them drop, and then what happened here is they're going to incur a loss, and that's a loss in the income statement. So now, to save these commercial banks, to get rid of the bad debt here, right? Okay, so that the bank is going to be able to come back to normal. You got an impaired financial system here. So now, right, I'm going to need to save this bank. I need to get them healthy again so that they will be able to lend the firms. If they're not healthy, they will not lend to anybody. So I'm going to need to get them healthy again. So instead of like asking them, okay, to just, I'm going to buy treasury bond from them, I'm going to agree to buy their other securities, like mortgage-backed security and all those things. Okay, so now they started to buy mortgage-backed security, they buy other things. And also here, during the financial crisis here, instead of lending to financial institutions, when we say financial institutions here, basically that's a commercial bank only. The central bank in the past only played the lender of last resort to commercial banking system. They will not save other firms. But here, right, they lend to key credit markets, so they lend to other financial institutions, apart from the commercial bank. So now they're going to look at the problem that we have here. Okay, so here, right? Quantitative easing. Okay, so we just applied quantitative easing here, right? In 2008. And then credit easing here, right? So basically, for example here, in the US, for example, a year after the crisis here, the central bank buy more than $1 trillion, that means $1,000 billion in MBS, and they want to basically lower the mortgage yield and support the market. That's not what they're going to do in normal. That's what they're going to do in normal. Okay, so, and also lend to other, non-banks here, non-banks. But then we're going to have problems. Okay, so now, if we are at point D, And then from point B to point D here, it may be around like $4,000 billion in those quantitative calculations assumed in credit standard more. Now we're at point D. And then inflation happened. The central bank wants to increase interest rate. What should we do? And you can see that the US central bank, they did increase interest rate, right? But how could they do? No. But they promised during that quantitative easing, right? But now is the time, right? So for example, now, right? Inflation happened. They promised that they will not increase rates to deal with the problem during the global financial crisis. But then after that, right, you can see right in when the economy recovered. So in 2016, they started to increase interest rate. But then after that, they dropped it down to zero because of the pandemic, and now they increase it again. So they did increase that, but how could they increase it? Are they going to sell this much to the market to get to point B, and then get here to 1%? Okay, so that's what they do. What they got to do here, right? In normal way, if you're point D, and in order to increase interest rate, you will need to get rid of this 4,000 billion worth of whatever, and then get down there, right? Here, so that you're gonna increase interest rate, which was impossible. If the central bank sells that more $1 billion in the market, what's gonna happen? Another crisis, right? So they cannot do that. So the temporary solution gonna be they're gonna increase the deposit rate. They're gonna increase the deposit rate because the deposit rate is the minimum of the Fed fund rate. So by increasing the deposit rate, they're gonna increase this to that point. Say 1%, for example. Is it 1%? And then they're gonna be able to increase interest rate here right to 1%. Because the deposit rate here is the floor of the Fed fund rate. And that is 5% or something, right? But then it means that the commercial bank plays exact reserve with the central bank, and then the central bank needs to pay that rate for the commercial bank, and it's costly, right? It's costly to increase interest rate. And that's something that you can do temporarily, but you cannot do it in a long time. Okay? So in the end, finally, you're gonna get here back to this, and we call that the normalization process. The normalization process. So over time, the central bank gonna need to reduce the size of their balance sheet back to point B, and then gradually get to this normal area of the demand curve. You cannot be on that flat one forever. So back here, right? You see what happened? Okay, you're right. This is the monetary base in the US. Monetary base in the US. And basically, that's the size of the balance sheet. So here, right, before the crisis, it around 800 billion. And then this is the increase in crisis, right? And then you got quantitative easing 1, that much. Quantitative easing 2, that much. And here is around like 4,000 billion. 4,000 billion. So the economy, when it gets to 16 here, right? And then the United States, they see that the economy is going, it's back, going okay. So they started to increase interest rate. And they started to thinking about reducing the size of the balance sheet. Okay, so they start the periods of normalizations. But then, if you look at the problems here. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the number is just here. Okay, so it's related, so if you right, it's not that. So if you look at this one here, right, so this is the balance sheet in 2014, and I assume here. Okay, so just try to remember that, right? So we got the treasury security around 2.5, 2.6 trillion dollars. Treasury security and treasury bonds and bills. But if you look at here, right, federal agency, government sponsored enterprise, mortgage-backed security, net 1.78 times. So around at 1.8 trillion dollars in the form of mortgage-backed security. That's in 14. And then if you want to reduce the size of the balance sheet, you're gonna need to sell those things to the market. So what happened? Have another disaster, right? So you'll see that, right? And this is again, right? In 19, right? So that's before the crisis. And if you look at that, right, they still got around 1.6 here, trillion dollars in mortgage. So in the US, basically, they started the process here of declining. So they anyway, right? We're gonna finally get to this point. So that back to normal. So starting from 1917, they declare that they're gonna involve in the process of normalizations. They're gonna try to reduce here the size of their balance sheet, and that creates problem in the market. You can see, right, if you still remember what happened in 1918, and people talk about like the inverted yield curve, and then the problem in China, in the emerging country, the recession and so on. And if anybody here, right, invested in the stock market in 2018, it was really a bad year at that time as well. After 17, everything is just like booming. And then started 18 crop, and that's at that time. That time. And then, so that's it around 4,000. And then pandemic happened and boom, and you are here at 7,000. So now, right, the size of the US here, right, 7,000. And now the next question is here, right? They anyway, later in the future, right, they're gonna need to get it back to normal, and how they're gonna do that. So they experience that. That is something that they have to do to stimulate after the global financial crisis. But 15 years already passed, and we are still in this problem without knowing that what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so now, right, by increasing the deposit rate, the US Central Bank and the Central Bank are the same. They could still increase the market rate, the Fed fund rate, but then they still got that large size here of the size of the market rate consists of a lot of like risky assets. So what they try to do now here is like they should wait until those assets expire. They sell it very small amount to the market. They will not be able to sell it in large quantity. But if they sell in large quantity, right, and then prices again, another crisis. So what they do here, right, to reduce the size, they let those expire. So they wait until those expire, and also they sell in a small quantity. But then, okay, so that's the quantitative easing and credit easing. And also, right, before I talk about the negative interest rate policy, so the negative interest rate policy basically, they set the negative rate on the deposit rate. So if you keep money as a reserve, right, instead of having the rate, or even zero, right? You have to be charged a negative rate. So do not keep excess reserve, try to lend money out. That's another way that the central bank wants to encourage commercial bank to lend money out. So negative interest rate. Yes, please.
Sorry, teacher, I haven't got this because as you said in the previous session that this time the commercial bank rate up risk, so they deny to lend money out, right?
So they sit on a lot of money,
Yes.
and then the central bank say, okay, you sit on a lot of money, they got a lot of excess reserve, and they want to charge you money, interest on this asset reserve.
Yeah, but I haven't got through why this policy can stimulate the commercial bank to lend me out. Because if the commercial bank lend money from the central bank based on the asset deposit, such as the mortgage bond, as you say, and that asset come to bad debt, for example, they still must return the money to the central bank, right?
No, they sell it to the central bank. So the commercial bank got mortgage-backed security, but in order to help them to be healthy again, because you're right, you got those mortgage-backed security, they were kind of bad debt, and you kind of deal with those, right? It's still there, and then if they lose value, and then you're gonna lose further. So in order to help commercial bank to be healthy again, the central bank agreed to buy on those mortgage-backed security. So they buy. So first, I'm the central bank, you are the commercial bank, right? So I said, okay, I want to buy on your mortgage-backed security, and then in your balance sheet you clear, right? And I want to pay you money, so you got my money. But then I want you, right, to use the money here to lend to firms. Firms got money, they make investment, I will get demand increase. But you scared. You didn't want to lend money out.
Yeah, but
You kept all the money in your vault or you kept money in the bank, right? In my banks, you didn't want to lend out. So I said, okay, if you keep money in the central bank with a lot of money, because I credit money to euro and it's still there, you have to pay me a negative rate. Sorry, I'm gonna pay you a negative rate. That means you're gonna pay me a rate. Okay, so you have two options, right? One, you pay money interest to me, and two, right? You lend to firms and you can earn interest. Okay, choose.
so what they did in the past, they used the conventional policy tools, and they reduced the deposit rate and the negative rate as well, right?
So basically, right, in the first place, when crisis happened, and then right, the central bank, they increased minimum reserve, reduced the Fed fund rates, reduced all these rates to zero. So you're right, they increased money supply, they cut interest rate, they cut it a little, until it equal to zero, but still failed to stimulate the economy. So they get to point B when all the rates drop to zero, but still fail to stimulate the economy. So they have to do, right, still increase, still try to pump in more and more money to the economy. Right? But they realized that if they pump more and more money to the economy, but banks still didn't want to lend money out, and that didn't work either. So you got the negative interest rate policy. Okay, you sit on a bunch of money. Before, it's okay to sit on that bunch of money, but now you sit on that bunch of money, you have to pay interest to me. I don't pay you negative interest, and you pay interest to me. Okay, so lend money out. Lend money out. Okay, so that's a negative interest rate policy, unlike a lot of different countries. So it doesn't mean that negative interest rate policy, that means the commercial banks pay negative rate to firms, no. But that's the central bank pay negative interest rate on the deposit rate of commercial banks to encourage commercial banks lending money out. Okay? Right. But anyway, now right, we see the risk that the world central bank they got that much assets in their total, in their balance sheet, right? A lot of them, they are risky assets. They are risky assets, and now they're going to need to deal with this problem here, so that the economy back to normal. In the past, before 2008, and when the central bank conduct the OMO, for example, they intervene in this market, and they just around this normal area. It's just okay, but now they're somewhere here. Okay, and then maybe sometime in the future, we're gonna get out of this inflation. Okay, so we get out of this inflation, economy growing again, but then there will be some point that those central banks, they're gonna start the process of normalizations, and we expect for that process. We got that once here, right? And 2018 is not good, right? But then pandemics, everybody forgot about that time, but they can more about the pandemic. But here, anyway, in some time in the future, they're gonna need to read that time. Okay, and that is monetary